few weeks ago, Nigeria's main opposition party, the People's Democratic Party, PDP, wasted no time in going before the Supreme Court to contest the affirmation by a tribunal, the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal, of President Muhammadu Buhari as the rightful winner of the 2019 presidential election at the expense of his candidate, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. And as the highest court in the land prepares to make what will be the ultimate and final pronouncement on that matter, the nation once again waits with bated breath. In the meantime, a lot of Nigerians may have refocused their attention on how to keep their heads above water in an economy which many analysts say is being strangulated by a growing lack of policy uncertainty, made worse by some of the scaremongering tactics of the day. This morning, we'll be, in a matter of moments, be dwelling into all of this by talking to Peter Obi, a former two-term governor of Anambra State in southeast Nigeria and vice presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party. We'll also be taking him up on the subject of the economy, which he sounds passionate about. A major player in Nigeria's private sector, Peter Obi is reputed to have brought about a lot of prudence and dexterity in the management of the resources of Anambra State during his time as governor. We'll also take him up on other issues, like the motivation behind the PDP going to the Supreme Court, his party's efforts to reposition itself, the southeast of Nigeria in the light of the emerging geopolitical power play in Nigeria, and the obsession of the political class with the politics of 2023, among other issues.
We shall then be moving on to more issues by firstly talking to Tomi Davies, the creator of direct.uk.gov, which is an e-governance portal of the British government, as well as a consultant to a firm that implemented the biometric-based integrated payroll and personnel system for the federal government of Nigeria. So we'll be speaking with him about innovation and e-governance as a pathway to national development and also prevention of financial fraud. Now, as we wind down, it's going to be time to talk to Bukola Idowu, a public policy analyst and executive director of Kimpact Development Initiative, which is an NGO working for good governance, policy advocacy, elections and youth development. He's going to be here looking at civil society and what we should be doing to preserve the sanctity of the forthcoming governorship elections in Bayelsa State. We'll also, of course, be catching up on news making headlines across the globe and review the newspapers with Arise News analyst Emmanuel Ifeni, while Oji Okpi will also be here to fill us in on what's trending around the world. It's going to be all of that and a whole lot more today on The Morning Show. Welcome back to The Morning Show here on Arise News. It's now time for us to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. The Nigerian military is tinkering with a new war strategy to end terror attacks by insurgent groups in the northeast within 3 months. Now, the new strategy, as learned by our sister outfit this day, followed the widespread criticism of the present strategy, Super Camp, which entails concentration of a large number of troops in a particular area from where troops launch attacks on insurgents. It has also gathered that following advice by military strategists and countries with strong military backgrounds, especially in tackling insurgency, Defense Ministry officials are focusing on the massive procurement and deployment of attack helicopters and gunships. Attack helicopters, armed helicopters, or helicopter gunships are designed to fire on enemy troops and vehicles. So, Doctor, I'm going to bring our favorite word or statement into this, security architecture. So the government is looking at a new, or the Defense Headquarters is looking at a new sort of security architecture for the military. What's your take on this?
Well, each time the service chiefs now talk about deploying a new strategy, it's become laughable. I mean, what they are saying is that they are going to deploy a lot of attack gun helicopters. So what is original in that? What constitutes strategy in that? Ordinarily, I mean, that would be an item of combat, an item of warfare. I'm not a soldier, but I don't think that this is something that is original or special, that is something to be celebrated. I mean, all the time we've been told they will work out a strategy. After all, the other time, there was a Security Council meeting that was held, and they came out with a resolution and said, oh, the strategy architecture that they had adopted was working, and they will stick to it. So at what point did it occur to them that the strategy is no longer working and that deployment of helicopters is a strategy? Except the report is not detailed enough. You know, I mean, I'm not a soldier, but, you know, a defense chief coming to tell me the deployment of helicopters in, you know, a warfare, even if it's an asymmetrical warfare, like the combat against terrorism amounts to a strategy, doesn't sound smart or intelligent to me. But, however, what is important is that, you know, Nigerians expect the military, the police, all the security agencies to succeed, you know, in fighting the terrorists who are causing us problems and who seem to be so resilient. So the war is not over until it is over. It's not about talking about strategy on the pages of newspapers. Yep. It is about achieving and making progress on the battlefield. Because at the end of the day, what we're confronted with is a threat to the integrity of the Nigerian state, it's a threat to the sovereignty of the Nigerian state, and it's an assault on the rights of Nigerians to live peacefully, you know, and to be secure within their own environment. So the war strategy is something that should be used carefully.
Absolutely.
You know, the people who are just throwing that word around, apparently they don't understand it. Although the Nigerian government invests a lot in the training of our military personnel. Many of them are very well trained. But when they, you know, engage the Nigerian public and they are talking about strategy, we would like to hear something that is coming from well-trained and intelligent people, not just, you know, newspaper statements.
Absolutely, because I don't understand how that is supposed to be a strategy as opposed to what they're currently describing as a strategy being super camp, of keeping loads of troops in a particular area. So I don't see how the
in any case, if it's a
war
strategy, it's not a thing they will make public, because a strategy gives you an advantage.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if it's a strategy, it will not be on the pages of newspapers.
Yeah.
Because then you are sharing your advantage with the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Let's move on to a rather horrific report. At least 119 Nigerians are on death row in Malaysia. This is according to Amnesty International, and they were arrested over drug-related offenses and later convicted. The human rights organization disclosed this in a report that was titled, "Fatally Flawed: Why Malaysia Must Abolish the Death Penalty." It said 1,281 people are on death row in the country, and that the inmates are being kept in 26 detention facilities across the country. While the organization is against death sentence, it has not said that they were not given a fair trial as part of customary international law. Over 100 Nigerians are on death row in Malaysia. That is absolutely tragic.
Yes, I agree with you, but I mean, it's not just tragic, it's also very unfortunate. But I think the key point, two key points by the Malaysian authorities, by Amnesty International commenting on the problem, is that one, these persons have not been given fair trial. And there are some countries in the world, Malaysia is one of them, Saudi Arabia is one of them, where the death penalty, you know, is used almost indiscriminately without due regard for human rights. And I think that, you know, the international community should continue to investigate this. Even where the death penalty will be applied, then of course the rights of the individuals involved ought to be respected. So if there is a case of unfair trial here, then of course, you know, the advocacy should be about the review of the cases to ensure that, you know, justice is done and that these persons are not just being targeted. The second point is about the involvement of the death penalty itself, you know, which the Amnesty International is opposed to. And there is advocacy, international advocacy, not just by Amnesty International, but also other groups, that the death penalty is an assault on the right to life. And that in any case, it's not been proven that, you know, it provides any kind of reduction in terms of people's predilection to crime. In other words, it doesn't really solve the problem. You just destroy a human being, and that also, it's counter to the reformatory objective, you know, of the correctional system. In other words, when a person commits a crime, the expectation is that that person can
be rehabilitated.
reformed. But when you apply the death penalty, it amounts to a finality on the existence of that person. So those are two, basic issues raised by Amnesty International. As for the involvement of Nigerian nationals, only recently when the President Muhammadu Buhari visited South Africa, he made the point, and it's a salient point, I guess, that, look, when you are in another country, you have to respect the laws of that country. Even if the Nigerian government is coming to your rescue, it must be seen, that it's not as if you have gone out of your way as a Nigerian to violate the laws of a country. And of course, drug smuggling, either in Malaysia or Singapore or even in Nigeria, it's a criminal offense. However, I will urge that, given the number of Nigerians involved, the Nigerian authorities, out of the principle of people-focused diplomacy, should quickly wade into the matter and see whether there are cases of Nigerians involved in Malaysia accused of drug-related offenses who may still be rescued, for reasons that maybe they had unfair trial, or that, they've not been treated well. And if there are still others on the death row, can the Nigerian government intervene and see that there is fairness and that there is justice? And that's a job for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also for the Diaspora Commission. But of course, that will not amount to condoning crime, Some Nigerians will go a step further and say, well, some Nigerians are involved in crime because Nigeria is not conducive. That's not an argument. That cannot be an excuse for criminality.
Absolutely. Yes. But when you have over 100 of your own nationals on death row in another country, it's so important for the government to see that they must intervene in this matter. Like, that's not something that can be let slide. On to our next headline. Worried by the intractable problem of fuel subsidy, which has affected the amount of money that's available for distribution amongst three tiers of government, governors of the 36 states of the Federation are mulling presented to the Nigerian government a demand for their shares and those of the local governments from the Federation account to be given to them in dollars. Now, one of the governors confided to This Day at the weekend in Abuja that their efforts to resolve the issue so far have failed to yield any positive result due to pushbacks from some federal government officials who believed in a full deregulation of the downstream sector of the oil industry, which would lead to uncapping petrol prices, which would be injurious to the poor, whom President Muhammadu Buhari has vowed to protect from such vulnerabilities like these of the nation's economy. Now, the governor's upcoming push comes just as Nigerian Governors Forum, NGF chairman and Ekiti State Governor Dr. Kayode Fayemi criticized the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit, NFIU, for writing to banks to restrict transactions from joint accounts between states and local governments. We will take up some analysis on this just after a slight commercial break. Do stay with us. You're watching The Morning Show here on Arise News. Welcome back. You're still watching The Morning Show here on Arise News. We're still on the news headlines discussing the front page of our sister outfit today. This day, governors to demand states share of Federation accounts in dollars. And, of course, there are several arguments and sides to this. But what's your take, Dr. Abbasi?
Well, I mean, there are clearly two sides to it. I have my own personal view on the matter. My personal view is that, in the first place, we cannot have a national currency that we treat like trash. And we've had these arguments over the years, for decades, about how to save the naira, how to strengthen the naira. And there are economists who believe that the best way to save the naira is to run the Nigerian economy in naira. And that because we do our transactions in dollars, we weaken the naira itself. And then, of course, it creates all kinds of distortions in the economy. The second side of the argument is about the multiple exchange rate that has been adopted by the central bank, the multiple window. Now, for example, this 2020 budget as proposed is pegged at 305 to the dollar, 305 naira to the dollar. But meanwhile, the states, they do their transactions, and others do their transactions at the rate of about 360 to the dollar. So it creates a gap. So it will seem as if you have put the states at a disadvantage. And then, in fact, they lose money at the end of the day. So those are the two sides of it. And the governors that are under pressure to deliver in their various states to their constituents are saying that that is probably, that is clearly unfair to them. So they want the economy, they want to get their share of the federation account under Section 162 of the Constitution in dollars. Now, should we run our economy in dollars? Or should we run it and find ways in a way in which we can strengthen the value of the naira itself? You may then put up the argument and say, well, after all, our main product, oil, which accounts for the bulk of our, revenue, that it's dollar denominated. We do business in dollars, so we should share, money in dollars. But then again, that raises questions about the management of the economy itself. And I hope that this is clearly one issue that President Buhari can put before the Economic Advisory Council to go into the rigorous economics of it.
Absolutely.
But I think that this is a clear indication of how we mismanage the economy. The other issue that has been raised by the governors is about the removal of subsidy. They're asking for deregulation of the downstream sector, removal of subsidy, which is something that has been recommended by many experts, again, particularly the World Bank, saying that the subsidy regime is unsustainable. You recall that a few years back, when I was still in government, this was a major issue. And the argument about the deregulation of the downstream sector was that, look, this is not sustainable. This is like, subsidizing the rich to impoverish the poor. But the matter was politicized at the time, and it became a big issue of protest and all of that. And of course, removal of subsidies is an issue everywhere. It's even an issue in Ecuador, But at the end of the day, we really could not go all the way. Now it is curious that the same APC, governors and, strikers, as we call them in politics, they are the ones now saying, oh, you have to remove this subsidy because the governors always want more money. The other leg of it is that these governors that are asking for dollars, that are asking for, deregulation of subsidy. Now, what do they do with the money? The eternal question is about accountability. We raise questions of accountability. Are these governors accountable? And it's a question that we should continue to ask. The third issue raised by the governors through the chairman of the Governors Forum, Kayode Fayemi, the governor of Ekiti State, is about the NFIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, saying that, look, money should go directly to local councils and that state governments should not withdraw money due to local councils. Well, I don't think the chairman of the Governors Forum is in a position to make a final statement on the matter. The matter hasn't been taken to court by the governors themselves. But of course, from our own side, we would like to see all levels of government, federal, state, and local councils functioning effectively. And if there is any error in the law, any mischief in Section 162, that, of course, should also be a matter for the National Assembly.
Absolutely. Now over to Syria, where residents of the northern city of Al-Hasakah, have been taking to the streets to celebrate an agreement between fighters of the Kurdish fighters and the government forces to help fend off Turkey's invasion of northern Syria. Earlier, the Kurds said that the Syrian government troops will deploy along the border with Turkey hours after President Donald Trump ordered all U.S. troops to withdraw from the area to avoid getting caught in the middle of the fast-escalating conflict. Now, the announcement represents a major shift in alliances for Syria's Kurds after they were abandoned by the U.S., with whom they were long-time partners in the fight against the Islamic State group. So, of course, this has been a hot topic in the news over the past week or so, simply because of the main fact that it's just become an avenue for ISIS to kickstart again. But what is your take on this latest development?
Well, clearly the Kurds, the SDF, social democratic forces, they found themselves in a difficult place, having been abandoned by their main allies, the United States. Over a 5-year period, support by the United States made it possible for the Kurds to protect their main heartland between Turkey and Syria. But by Sunday, the other Sunday, not this one, the United States withdrew about 1,000 troops that have been working with the courts within the region. And President Trump's excuse is that it's a waste of time and resources for the United States to be involved in the crisis in the Middle East. And that the United States was just fighting a proxy war. And the United States insists that they've been able to defeat, the Islamic Caliphate that emerged in that region. Of course, many Americans, including Republicans, Senator Graham, and also former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and other voices of reason in the United States, thought that this was a case of the United States betraying an ally, and dropping the ball and making a paradigm shift in terms of the foreign policy engagement in Syria and Turkey. Now, what we have seen now is the outcome. So the Kurdish forces found themselves in a difficult place, and what they have tried to do is to strike an alliance with the Assad government in Syria, and also by extension with Russia, which is allied to the Assad government in Syria at the moment. And the main gist of the alliance is to protect, that corridor in northern Syria, to make it difficult for the Turkish forces to advance further. The Turkish forces are saying they will advance beyond even 30 kilometers into Syria to create a safe corridor for refugees and to protect Turkey. Turkey continues to insist that the Kurdish forces in northern Syria, that they are terrorists, because you have these Kurdish forces creating problems in Turkey, and Turkey thinks that it is a strategic security concern for it to protect that corridor. But how far will they go? As of this morning, they've covered up to about 21 villages, and they've advanced significantly. So it's in the Assad government's interest to also, restrict them, to push them back.
Absolutely.
But what is more of concern is the concern that has been expressed earlier by John Stoltenberg, of NATO, that, look, there should not be escalation of the crisis. What we see is that there's likely to be escalation. He also expressed concern about a likely humanitarian crisis. That humanitarian crisis has already occurred. Because many of the ISIS fighters, 12,000 of them, 4,000 of them foreigners, about 800 of them have already, escaped from the various camps that the Kurdish forces were keeping. And if you have that, then of course you have very serious crisis, within that corridor. We just hope that maybe at some point the United States will reconsider its position. But the Kurdish forces aligning with the Assad government, they're just doing it for survival. And their leader says, rather than choose death, they will choose to protect their people.
Absolutely. They have no other option but to do that. And it's such a... Anyway, there's so many dynamics to this situation, but at the end of the day, Donald Trump went about this in the wrong way, and this is the effects of that now, and the repercussions are not worth it. On to our next story. Celebrations erupted in the streets of Quito following the announcement that President Lenín Moreno and leaders of Ecuador's indigenous peoples had struck a deal late last night to cancel a disputed austerity package. Now, resident United Nations coordinator in Ecuador, Arnold Peral, read a statement peace negotiation table in which he announced the deal. Under the agreement announced just before 10 p.m. local time, Moreno will withdraw the International Monetary Fund-backed package known as Decree 883 that included a sharp rise in fuels. The two sides will work together to develop a new package of measures to cut government spending, increase revenues, and reduce Ecuador's unsustainable budget deficits and public debt. Let's take a look. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time to take that video right now, Doctor, but what is your take on this?
Well, I mean, what I see in the Ecuador story is a similarity with Nigeria. I mean, the whole issue...
That's what I was going to say, literally.
The whole issue is about the smuggling of fuel across the border to neighboring countries, and the Ecuadorian government trying to remove subsidies to see how you can check that. And that has led to weeks of demonstrations. Almost the same kind of thing that we have in Nigeria. But it's interesting that the government has said, well, peace is more important than violence. And the two parties, with peace brokered by the Catholic priests and some other groups, came together and said, well, we'll take a second look at this. and we will worry more about how to prevent the smuggling of fuel, you know, and then defend the interest of the people. Absolutely. I guess if we study what has happened in Ecuador so far, you know, there will be lessons that we too can learn in Nigeria about subsidy.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said that better myself. Several lessons that we can learn. But that is all that we have on the news headlines.